For months, whispers echoed through the palace halls, an unconfirmed rumor of a private gathering held in silence and shielded from press. But no one could confirm it until now. The truth has shattered decades of royal tradition. A secret event that took place behind gilded doors just altered the line of succession forever. And not everyone was invited. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. It began with a subtle disruption. A midnight flurry of activity among palace staff triggered curiosity, an uptick in high-clearance movement logged by internal systems, followed by an abrupt lockdown of several royal quarters. No alarms, no announcements, only the cold efficiency of a well-rehearsed drill. The Queen's former footman was seen entering the archive wing with a sealed case, while two aides wheeled out a covered trunk believed to house ceremonial regalia not used since Queen Elizabeth's passing. Just hours before, a fleet of unmarked black vehicles slipped quietly into Balmoral under heavy surveillance, bypassing usual entry records. The guest list was never released, but through cross-referenced leaked footage, one figure was unmistakably present: Catherine, Princess of Wales. What followed has shaken the monarchy's foundation. A highly restricted agenda document, later leaked by an anonymous insider, bore a single coded line: Designation Protocol. Sovereign approval. This wasn't a regular meeting. It was a formal declaration. According to Deep Palace sources, this was the culmination of months of clandestine preparation. The room was stripped of advisors, stripped of press, and notably stripped of certain senior royals, most glaringly, Camila, whose absence from such a pivotal event raised immediate alarms. In her place, silent witnesses of power, the Lord Chancellor, Princess Anne, and the Archbishop of Canterbury, all present and sworn to confidentiality. Security footage reveals a ceremonial chest being unlocked moments before the private council began. Inside, a relic believed to be Queen Elizabeth's handwritten constitutional notes, preserved since the 1990s, was unsealed. It said that the Queen foresaw the turbulence ahead and drafted a contingency clause that gave the reigning monarch limited authority to name a Queen Designate in extraordinary circumstances, bypassing traditional succession rights. It was a clause never intended for use. Until now, the implications are seismic. For Catherine to be named Queen Designate rather than Queen Consort signals a shift far more radical than anyone anticipated. This is not simply about elevation, it's about redefinition. For decades, royal titles have followed hierarchy and history. But in a single stroke, King Charles has drawn a new line in the sand. This wasn't a symbolic gesture. This was a formal anointing of Catherine as a monarch in waiting, not by marriage, but by power, intent, and destiny. For supporters of tradition, it's an earthquake. For the younger generation of royals watching from the sidelines, it's a redrawing of the battlefield. The most haunting detail? An internal memo marked "Eyes Only" confirmed that Charles signed the document with a quill, last used by Queen Elizabeth II during her Silver Jubilee, accompanied by an inscription reportedly quoting her own words. The strength of the crown lies in who carries it next. It was personal, it was precise, and it was final. But this wasn't just a symbolic gesture. It was a decisive act of power. And what happened inside that room could ignite a royal war no one saw coming. In a monarchy obsessed with protocol, King Charles did the unthinkable. In a move that stunned even his most loyal allies, he bypassed centuries of unwritten law and named Catherine Queen Designate, not consort, not companion, but the rightful future monarch. And he did it in silence, with no press, no fanfare, and no Camila. The decision wasn't impulsive. It was the result of months, some say years, of internal conflict. King Charles had grown increasingly disturbed by the monarchy's fragile image in the modern age. The scandals, the divisions, the relentless public scrutiny, it was all unraveling faster than the crown could manage. What had once been a fortress of tradition now trembled on a foundation of public doubt. And at the center of that unease was a quiet but growing concern, the legacy he would leave behind. In late-night correspondence unearthed by a whistleblower, Charles confessed in writing that continuity must rise above companionship, a thinly veiled reference to his conflict over Camilla's public standing. What began as a personal struggle slowly evolved into a state affair, with palace advisors divided and the shadow of Queen Elizabeth's reign looming larger than ever. The tipping point came not from Camilla but from Harry. Charles's emotional rift with his younger son had created a dangerous vacuum, one that exposed the monarchy's vulnerabilities to both internal dissent and global media dissection. With Harry gone and the Sussexes launching a campaign of disruption from abroad, Charles knew he could no longer rely on tradition to hold the House of Windsor together. He needed an anchor, someone who embodied both public trust and royal discipline. And only one name echoed in every private poll, every internal evaluation, every crisis report: Catherine. Elegant, dutiful, unshaken by scandal, she wasn't just popular. She was the monarchy's best chance at survival. It was then that Charles invoked a clause buried deep in Queen Elizabeth's private succession documents, what insiders call the shadow clause. A contingency crafted decades ago, never publicly acknowledged, allowing the monarch to designate a successor beyond traditional titles in times of unprecedented instability. By using it, Charles wasn't just expressing a preference, he was making history. And inside that locked chamber, with royal minutes recorded under the strictest secrecy, he formally addressed Catherine not as consort, but as Her Majesty in Waiting, the Sovereign Designate. The words reportedly echoed in stunned silence. Even more telling was what was removed from the room. Camilla's portrait, once standing beside the late Queen's, was gone, replaced by a solitary image of Queen Elizabeth at her coronation alone, unflinching. It was no coincidence. It was symbolism in its purest, most brutal form. In that moment, everything shifted. The monarchy's future was no longer tied to the past it had clung to, but to a new chapter, one shaped by clarity, control, and calculated intent. But Charles's bold proclamation would not remain private for long, because within minutes the woman at the center of it all would face her own reckoning. She stood in shock, not from fear, but from the overwhelming weight of destiny finally catching up to her. As King Charles spoke the words, Catherine's breath caught. This wasn't just a title. It was a verdict on her life, her sacrifices, and the battle she never asked to fight. And behind her eyes, one name lingered: Diana. The moment the ceremony ended, silence swallowed the room. While dignitaries lowered their heads and royal advisors discreetly exited, Catherine remained motionless. One aide, standing just beyond the threshold, later revealed that tears streamed down her cheeks not from joy, but from the sheer, unbearable pressure of the moment. To the outside world, she had always been poised, polished, controlled. But in that room, she was a woman who had just been handed the burden of a kingdom. Not born into royalty, yet now tasked with embodying it. The gravity of what had just happened was too vast for words, too monumental for celebration. Pinned delicately near her heart was a sapphire and diamond brooch once worn by Princess Diana. Whether chosen intentionally or subconsciously, no one could say. But for those who noticed, it was a chilling echo of the past. As if the spirit of Diana hovered in the room, watching, witnessing, perhaps even warning. What Catherine carried wasn't just a crown, it was a legacy shaped by loss, pain, and silent endurance. That brooch shimmered like a ghostly reminder that the crown does not come without consequence. In the moments following, Catherine whispered a line that would later haunt royal staff. She knew this was no ceremonial promotion, it was a call to war. A war of loyalty, of bloodlines, of memory. She excused herself and, breaking protocol, requested solitude in Queen Elizabeth's private library, an unprecedented move. No guards, no aides, just Catherine, surrounded by the echoes of sovereigns past. She stayed there for nearly an hour. When she emerged, her expression had changed, not hardened, not emboldened, but quieter, as if she had seen something no one else could understand. A royal advisor later leaked that she had murmured, "This changes everything." And it did. For her children, for her marriage, for the monarchy. The ride back to Adelaide Cottage was telling she returned alone. William's absence raised immediate speculation. Whether he was processing, protesting, or simply retreating, the truth remained unclear. What was clear, however, was the isolation that now encased the newly titled Queen Designate. This was not a victory. It was an awakening, and the woman who had once walked behind others was now walking alone, ahead of everyone. But as the dust settled around the Queen Designate, a storm was brewing because the woman once declared queen was about to be erased from the royal future. She spent decades maneuvering through scandal, silence, and shame, only to be blindsided by a single whispered decree. Camila, once crowned queen consort in defiance of public rage, now finds herself stripped of power not by parliament but by her own husband. And what she does next could bring the monarchy to its knees. It wasn't a formal letter. It wasn't even a personal conversation. Camila learned of her erasure from a third-party source, an aide's assistant, whispering what had just occurred in hushed disbelief. The title she had fought so long to secure had been taken in the blink of an eye. During a meeting she was never invited to, with a proclamation she was never meant to hear. In Clarence House, the atmosphere turned icy. Moments after the news filtered in, a violent, crashing noise echoed through the West Wing. A decorative vase gifted to her by Charles years ago shattered across the marble floor. Staff were ordered to clear the hallway immediately. No questions, no statements, just silence charged and volatile. Then came the security downgrade. Within hours, Camilla's personal protection detail was scaled back. The change, while subtle on paper, sent a clear and cruel message. This wasn't a temporary adjustment. It was a deliberate disarming, a calculated retreat of royal trust. One by one, signs of her diminishing status began to pile up. Invitations rescinded. Staff reassigned. And then, the call. A private phone call unintentionally leaked to a royal press insider between Camila and Prince Harry revealed a side of her rarely seen, not controlled, not composed, but furious. "He's handing it all to her," she reportedly said, her voice cracking. "He's erasing me like I was never here." Even more shocking was Charles's refusal to meet her afterward. In over 17 years of marriage, he had never once denied her a private audience. Until now. Her formal request for an audience sent directly to his private secretary was marked delayed due to scheduling. Delayed. For a queen. That alone said everything. The silence between them, once used as a tool of negotiation, now became an unmistakable wedge. And in that void, Camila did something no one expected. She called her lawyer. Palace whispers suggest that Camila is exploring every legal recourse possible to challenge the legitimacy of the designation. While her legal footing may be weak, the very act of seeking counsel is a declaration of war. It signals that she won't go quietly, that she refuses to be relegated to the footnotes of royal history. This isn't about titles anymore. It's about survival. It's about legacy. And Camila, a woman once underestimated by nearly everyone, is preparing to defend both with everything she has left. But Camila wasn't the only one watching from the shadows, because one royal had long been planning for this day, and now her time had come. For years, Princess Anne remained the quiet architect behind royal stability. But what the world didn't see was the deal she struck behind closed doors. When the time came, she delivered the final signature, ensuring Catherine's rise and permanently locking Camila out. Anne didn't betray blood. She preserved the crown. Behind the formality of royal decorum, Anne operated with ruthless clarity. While others played for public favour or clung to outdated hierarchies, she played the long game. In the months leading up to the designation, Anne quietly assumed the chair of the Royal Advisory Council, an elite inner circle, entrusted with overseeing transitions in moments of national uncertainty. Her acceptance of this position was no accident. She took it with a purpose: to steer the crown towards stability and away from scandal's grip. Sources close to the palace confirmed that Anne personally pushed forward the motion to formalise Catherine's role, not as a ceremonial spouse, but as a designated sovereign. When the final vote was cast, It was Anne who sealed the outcome. But this wasn't merely procedural. Anne reached into the archives of her mother's reign and invoked a clause no one had dared touch before. Known internally as the Legacy Clause, it granted senior royal council members the authority to legitimize a sovereign's intent in exceptional circumstances, especially when national confidence in the monarchy was at stake. It was Queen Elizabeth's silent gift to the future, and Anne used it to close the gates on Camilla once and for all. In a confidential registry maintained by the royal notary, Anne's private seal appears beneath King Charles's signature. That seal, the final endorsement required by protocol, transformed the motion from concept to command. Without it, Catherine's designation would have remained symbolic. With it, it became law within the royal household. The seal wasn't just a formality, it was a weapon, and Anne wielded it with chilling precision. Their history made it personal. Tensions between Anne and Camilla had festered beneath the surface for decades, dating back to whispers of betrayal and shifting allegiances in the early 2000s. While Anne never spoke publicly of the rift, insiders recall the coldness in their interactions, the sharp avoidance at events, the way Anne would pivot away with royal indifference. When asked once about the future of the monarchy, she simply said, "It should be clean, and it should be clear." That clarity finally arrived with her whispered words to a trusted staffer on the day of the council. This is how it was always meant to be. During the private session that sealed Catherine's future, Anne offered no speeches, no grand declarations, only a single, calculated gesture, a silent nod in Catherine's direction. It was not just approval. It was allegiance. It was the transfer of quiet power from the monarchy's steel backbone to its emerging sovereign heart. And in that moment, Anne didn't just honor the past, she safeguarded the future. But while the elder royals maneuvered in secret, one future king was nowhere to be seen, and his silence spoke louder than any royal decree. He should have celebrated. Instead, he disappeared. Prince William, caught between duty and doubt, vanished from the public eye hours after the ceremony. As whispers of tension between him and Catherine escalate, royal insiders ask, was the designation a blessing, or the final blow to a royal marriage under strain? The moment Catherine was declared Queen Designate, all eyes turned to find the man who should have stood beside her. But William was nowhere to be seen. His absence wasn't just noted, it was thunderous. For a man trained to uphold tradition, to support the crown without hesitation, his silence sent shockwaves through the royal network. 3 high-level meetings scheduled at Kensington Palace that day were abruptly cancelled. His staff couldn't reach him. Royal aides grew anxious, and calls from his father's office went unanswered. A future king had gone quiet on the most pivotal day of his wife's royal life, and no one could explain why. Whispers quickly spread behind gilded walls. One insider, speaking under strict anonymity, claimed William was blindsided by the decision, that he had been kept in the dark until hours before the ceremony. While the monarchy has always favoured secrecy, the exclusion of the Prince of Wales from such a historic proclamation was more than unusual, it was a rupture. For years, William believed he would walk with Catherine as equals, that any assent would be theirs to share, but now the crown had tilted. Catherine wasn't just his wife anymore. She had become something separate, something sovereign, and in doing so, had stepped out from his shadow and perhaps into a spotlight that outshone him entirely. The pressure of legacy weighed heavier than ever. Diana's memory, so often a source of quiet strength, now felt like a mirror reflecting unresolved grief. Catherine's rise, ironically, had stirred the pain of Diana's fall. William's role, once clear and comforting, was suddenly uncertain. If Catherine was now Queen Designate, what did that make him? A prince in waiting? A bystander to history? A man displaced by the very monarchy he had devoted his life to protect? It was this storm of emotion that reportedly drove him to Althorpe, the place he rarely visits alone. Hours after the ceremony, he was spotted near Diana's grave, head bowed, alone, guarded only by the stillness of the estate. There, far from the pageantry of the palace and the noise of succession, William confronted the ghost of the crown he had always feared. a crown that destroyed his mother, a crown now sitting at the feet of his wife. It said he left without a word to staff, choosing the long, unlit road back in silence. And when he returned, he entered through a back gate, avoiding the media, the press, and even his own family. Not out of shame, but out of turmoil. As William wrestled with his blood and heart, another royal line quietly unraveled because this shift meant one thing. Camilla's entire family would now be cast into the royal abyss. They rose with Camila. They fell with her too. Overnight, the Parker Bowles family went from being royal inner circle to historical footnotes. The new designation brought a brutal clean-up: titles revoked, invites rescinded, and a quiet instruction to erase their names from the future of the monarchy. The fallout wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It was executed with chilling precision, the kind of ruthless efficiency only the firm could master. Within 24 hours of Catherine being named Queen Designate, the ripple effect reached Clarence House and swept through the Parker Bowles name like a blade. Tom and Laura, once guaranteed front-row seats at royal ceremonies, suddenly found themselves removed from every upcoming event list, not postponed, not explained, simply deleted. It was a purge wrapped in polite silence, and the message was unmistakable. Their era was over. For years, King Charles had quietly nurtured plans to formally elevate Tom's position within the royal framework. There had been talks never public, always whispered of a life peerage, a ceremonial role, something to cement the bond between blood and duty. But all of it vanished in a single stroke. The plans were revoked, the files closed, the path severed. Behind closed doors, Charles didn't offer an apology or even acknowledgement. What had once been a promise became a liability, and liabilities had no place in the monarchy's new order. Even the money stopped. Sources close to the royal accounts revealed that certain stipends provided for extended security and support to Camilla's children were quietly frozen. The justification? A shift in royal prioritization. But no one believed that. This wasn't bureaucracy. It was exile, in slow motion. Portraits of the Parker Bowles family, once displayed at Sandringham as a gesture of modern familial unity, were quietly taken down. No ceremony, no replacement. Just a blank wall where their likenesses used to hang, a visual symbol of how quickly the crown rewrites its loyalties. Meanwhile, Camilla's trusted staff, many of whom had stood beside her for decades, were either reassigned to distant departments or dismissed altogether. Those who remained were given new titles, stripped of the authority they once wielded. Their loyalty had been to a queen consort, whose reign had now been eclipsed, and the palace didn't tolerate shadows that lingered too long. Perhaps most chilling was the directive that came to royal media liaisons. Moving forward, press coverage was to avoid the term royal affiliates when referring to Camilla's children. Not illegal, not scandalous, but no longer relevant. It was a soft erasure, the kind that doesn't leave bruises, only silence. The firm had made its choice. Catherine's future demanded a clean stage, and the Parker Bowles chapter was being closed with icy finality. But in the wake of this purge, one name rose above the silence, and what she said next would send shockwaves across the globe. She didn't want the cameras, she didn't want the crown, but she couldn't stay silent. In a rare, emotionally charged private statement leaked through royal sources, Catherine confessed the truth behind the ceremony and what she feared it would cost her family, her husband, and her soul. The words weren't meant for the public. They were spoken in a low voice, behind closed doors, to a single, trusted aide who, overwhelmed by the rawness of what he heard, memorialized the moment in ink. What began as a confession quickly became a revelation, as Catherine, now Queen Designate, pulled back the veil not only on her own pain, but on the cost of power itself. This wasn't about power. It was about protection, she reportedly said, her voice trembling but unwavering. It was the first time anyone within the palace walls had heard her speak so directly about the decision that had rocked the monarchy from its core. Her admission revealed the emotional war that had quietly raged beneath her composed exterior. She didn't ascend for glory or ambition, she stepped forward because the alternative terrified her. Her eyes, she said, weren't on the crown but on her children. George, Charlotte, Louis. "I've seen what this institution can do to the unprepared," she continued, referencing the chaos and destruction of years past. "I needed to make sure they'd never be thrown into that without someone clearing the path first." It wasn't a bid for control, it was an act of defense, a shield forged from duty, not desire. And then, inevitably, she spoke of Diana, of the hole left in every royal room, of the legacy that still haunted every camera flash and every public wave. "She should have been here," Catherine whispered, pausing for several seconds. "Maybe none of this would have happened like this if she had been." Her words carried no bitterness, only sorrow. The burden of being seen as Diana's spiritual successor had always lingered in the background, but now, standing at the center of history, it pressed on her like never before. Even her marriage wasn't spared from the quiet storm, she confessed. She acknowledged the strain with William, not with resentment, but with heartbreaking clarity. "He will find his way," she said softly. "He always does, even when I don't know how to help him." It was a line that sent tremors through the palace, not because it signaled fracture, but because it showed the depth of the storm they were navigating together. Alone, yet still bound. Divided, but not broken. She ended with a line that would soon circulate far beyond the palace gates. "I accepted because someone had to choose the crown over comfort." It wasn't a boast. It was a warning. That behind every polished surface, every sparkling title, was a battlefield of sacrifice, one that left no heart untouched and no soul unscarred. But as the world absorbed Catherine's words, one final document surfaced, revealing this move wasn't just ceremonial, it was a prelude to a much larger plan. They called it Operation Sovereign Shift, a classified royal strategy, long buried in Queen Elizabeth's contingency vault, now fully activated. With Catherine named Queen Designate, a plan decades in the making is underway, and it could end Charles's reign far sooner than anyone expected. For years, it was a whisper among only the most trusted royal advisors, a theoretical safeguard for moments when the crown's stability hung in the balance. But now, those whispers have taken shape in a single explosive document, an internal protocol outlining a phased transition of power, not in 10 years, but in 2. The document, stamped with both the royal seal and a cipher known only to Queen Elizabeth's former inner circle, lays out what many are calling the most radical restructuring of the monarchy in modern history. At the heart of it is one shocking line: "Initiate succession framework under sovereign shift upon public designation of successor." With Catherine's rise, the countdown has begun. Sources close to the palace confirm that Charles, shortly after the Queen Designate ceremony, signed what's being called a reign adjustment clause. The clause legally permits a controlled handover of sovereign responsibility without requiring full abdication. It's a move designed to preserve his dignity while quietly installing the next generation into the monarchy's operating core. The signing was done in private, witnessed by only 2 royal officials and a constitutional advisor from the Queen's original staff, recalled specifically for this moment. Even more telling is the sudden schedule overhaul for both William and Catherine. A royal leadership training program typically reserved for ascendants near coronation has been activated early. They are set to begin an intensive regimen focused on foreign diplomacy, constitutional engagement, and high-level national briefings. It's preparation not for tomorrow's duties, but for a throne that's arriving faster than anyone expected. Meanwhile, Parliament has been briefed under the radar. High-ranking ministers have been handed sealed summaries of the transition timeline. No debate, just awareness, just readiness. The old guard has returned too. Names once thought long retired have resurfaced in palace corridors, advisors from Queen Elizabeth's era, brought back not to counsel Charles, but to prepare the next sovereign structure. The message is clear. This is not improvisation, it's orchestration. And at the center of it all is the final handwritten note from King Charles, reportedly sent to his most trusted aide. Just 5 words. The clock has started. Proceed. The game has changed. The crown is shifting, and what happens next will define the monarchy's future forever. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.